So let us start with the 21st class. When we met in the last lecture, I had told you that after international relation, we will be starting with science and technology or environment section. But then I realized that if we do science and technology or environment section now, you will forget them once the exam gets closer. So factual topics should be done later and the conceptual ones before. So what are the conceptual topics left now? That is socio-political issues. So we are picking the month of March and we will be doing the social issues, political issues. These 6 topics came in March month. These are all political issues. And let us see how much we can do today. First topic is judges in the Rajya Sabha. You know Ranjan Gogoi, former Chief Justice of India, has come in the Rajya Sabha by nomination. So we will see the article which allows this, or what are the implications of it, what are the issues, what is the recommendation of law commission about this. We will see everything. Second is for digital governance, national open digital ecosystem. So we will see what is node. Okay, then third topic is draft recommendation on election commission of India on electoral reforms. We will be talking about electoral reforms. Then delimitation of constituency starting from the Jammu and Kashmir, the new union territory of Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh. We are going for the delimitation of the constituencies. That we will see what is that. Quota within quota system. This system has come in Haryana for scheduled caste. Quota within quota. So very new innovative thing. And the section 188 of the IPC, I will tell you what is that. So these are the topics. Let us see how much we can do. So the first topic is judges in Rajya Sabha. First of all, you should know that this is not the first time that it is happening that a judge from Supreme Court has come into the Rajya Sabha. Anyway, the news came because Chief Justice of India, former Chief Justice of India, Ranjan Gogoi, was nominated as a member of Rajya Sabha. So what are the constitutional provisions for the nomination of any member in Rajya Sabha? You know your Article 80, and in that subclause 1A. The clause is 1, the subclause is 1A of the Constitution of India. That 81A has the provision for nomination. And how many members are to be nominated in Rajya Sabha by the President of India? You should remember who nominates President of India. Obviously, the recommendation will come by the cabinet only. But in executive, we will say that this is by President of India nomination, and 12 members are nominated. Okay. So this article only says that 12 members will be nominated by the President of India in the Rajya Sabha. But the provisions of it, that what kind of members will be nominated, that is present in Article 83. So clause 1 has this provision that President will be nominating 12 members in Rajya Sabha. But what kind of members and what are the provisions, that is mentioned in clause number 3 of Article 80. So what is it? Article 83 says that those persons which are to be nominated as members of the Rajya Sabha must have some special knowledge or practical experience. So either the knowledge like we have the knowledge only, right? We don't have the practical experience of administration. We just have knowledge. So those kind of people also who are having the special knowledge, and those kind of the people also who are having the actual in real life practical experience in such matters. Now your focus in this topic for the prelim should be these articles, and the second focus should be what kind of matters are mentioned: literature, science, art and social services. But now you know Sachin Tendulkar was also nominated. So how come? Sachin Tendulkar was not a literature artist or something, science, art. Sachin Tendulkar was nominated because it was considered by then UPA government that cricket he contributed in social service. Sports is not mentioned, but they wanted to take Sachin Tendulkar. So it was said that he was nominated through this social service section: literature, science, arts and social service. What about Ranjan Gogoi? These nominations will not come categorically, okay? But these are insider sources. So Ranjan Gogoi also for the social services because he was serving as the Chief Justice of India. But was it social service? Was not his duty? So there lies the conflict, right? So this is not the first time that a judiciary person has come into Rajya Sabha or Lok Sabha. If you see the past, in 1979, starting from the past, what happened? Justice Hidayatullah, he was appointed Vice President 9 years after his tenure as Chief Justice of India ended. Okay, after he was Chief Justice of India, after 9 years, he became Vice President of India only. Vice President of India is also an executive post, that is not judiciary. So judiciary coming in executive or other offices, this is the topic. He was not in Rajya Sabha. He directly became the Vice President of India. And you know, Vice President of India is not considered part of Parliament, part of Rajya Sabha. You should know that. Justice Ranganath Mishra. Acha, how much is the tenure? 6 years. Okay. Justice Ranganath Mishra, 6 years for the Rajya Sabha. Justice Ranganath Mishra was appointed 6 years after his retirement in 1998. What did he become? Justice Ranganath Mishra. First of all, he became the first chairman of National Human Rights Commission. But that is allowed actually. National Human Rights Commission chairman has to be a judge. But also he joined Congress later and became a member of Rajya Sabha. There are some other examples also which are not important, and you can pause the slide and see that. So what are the arguments defending this decision of the government? First of all, you should know that there is no constitutional provision which speaks against this. If you see the article 124(7), that says that if a judge from the Supreme Court is retired, if there is a judge retiring from the Supreme Court, what is not allowed is that he cannot plead. That means he cannot fight a case, okay? He cannot become a lawyer or act in any court or before any authority within the territory of India. Now, very, very peculiar, very special thing. Within the territory of India, he cannot plead. But can he go outside India and do his legal works? Yes, outside India allowed. Within the territory of India, not allowed. And recently, our one judge has went outside India. Do you remember the 4 judges case when 4 Supreme Court judges came out in front of media and spoke against the Indian judiciary problem and the previous Chief Justice of India? One of them was Madan Lokur. Madan Lokur now has moved to Fiji, and now in Fiji he has become the a judge in Supreme Court of Fiji. There are some other examples also. So within the territory of India, a retired Supreme Court judge cannot plead or act in any court or before any authority. Only restricts post-retirement appointments in judiciary itself. Also, one is territorial restriction. Okay. Second is that apart from judiciary, a Supreme Court retired judge or Chief Justice of India, they can go anywhere. For example, they can go in executive. They can become a part of legislature also. So only post-retirement jobs, those jobs which are in judiciary, only those are restricted. So there is no constitutional provision against this nomination of Chief Justice of India Ranjan Gogoi in the Rajya Sabha. Also, in our system, parliamentary system, there is not a strict separation of power like the American Constitution. We have some kind of amalgamation, some kind of in between things, that there is some little separation, there is some amalgamation also. So there are no strict separation of powers in Indian system among judiciary, executive and legislature. And one argument in favor is also that if a judge is coming from Supreme Court of India or High Court of India in the parliament, that will add to the value of the Rajya Sabha debates. That will add to the value of the legislature process, the law-making process, because they know what is right and what is wrong. They will certainly provide some feedback about if the law you are making is ultra-vires or not, because they have worked in the judiciary. So we will save some resources also. This law might be rejected by the Supreme Court, so let us not make this law. So those feedbacks will come, those value additions will come when a Rajya Sabha member is from the judiciary. What are the arguments against? Undermining independence of judiciary. It is said that the biggest pleader in the Supreme Court or in front of judiciary is the government itself. So today, suppose if a particular judge is giving favor to government or giving some decisions which are favoring government, and tomorrow the same judge is appointed by the government in the Rajya Sabha or Lok Sabha, that gives a case of doubt. Okay, case of doubt. So this is somehow quid pro quo. Not exactly quid pro quo, but of the nature of the same nature. This also leads to loss of constitutional propriety. Today, a judge giving a controversial and highly contested case in favor of the government then accepts a post-retirement job. The public will lose faith in judiciary. They will think that no, they were working for the government because tomorrow they are going to get a post. So these are the arguments against it. Now let us see what has the Law Commission recommended. In 1958 only, during the Jawaharlal Nehru time, 14th report of Law Commission came. That report said that Supreme Court judges usually engage in 2 kinds of work after retirement. It said that it made a survey and made a study and said that generally after retiring from Supreme Court, the judges do 2 kinds of work. First is chamber practice. Chamber practice is like not pleading in front of the court, but they will open an office where you can go, you can get some opinion, you can become a client and they will give you opinion and everything, and you will provide the money. And sometimes there are some private disputes. The judge will set a chamber and say that, okay, fine, I have worked in judiciary, so I know the law. You come to me, do not go to the court, and I will give a decision. And some private parties actually agree, okay, fine, not going to the court because court has a huge pendency. So this judge will give some feedback and he will give the right feedback. So let us not go to the court, settle the matter here only, because even if you go in the court, the decision will be the same. And the second kind of work is employment in important positions under the government. What is that? Employment in important positions, NHRC. Or you can't say Supreme Court and governor is the employment, but of the same nature only, some post. Law Commission said that this chamber practice should be highly discouraged. This is very wrong, and this is very wrong. This is kind of private business. So judge retiring from Supreme Court and High Court should not do the chamber practice. But still it did not recommend its abolition. It said that this looks very wrong, but they did not recommend that this should be abolished at all. Also, it strongly recommended banning post-retirement government employment for the Supreme Court judges because the government was a large litigant in the courts. It also spoke against post-retirement government employment jobs. So what do you think? What did the government do? Government did not do anything. Government just saw this report and ignored this report. Nothing has happened. Okay, a lot of discussion. Now come to the very factual topic. National Open Digital Ecosystem, NODE. NODE is also a very good term, and National Open Digital Ecosystem is also a very good term. In our India, we have a concept minimum government and maximum governance. How will this come? Minimum government means minimum manpower, minimum officers and everything, but the governance to the people, the service to the people should be maximum. How can that come? By providing digital ecosystem, by providing autonomous institutions, by providing electronic and web platforms, these kind of things. So for electronic and web platforms, what ministry we have? METI, Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. So first of all, they came with a plan, National Open Digital Ecosystem, and for that they have released a consultation paper. They need some feedback and a strategy and everything. So that is why the consultation paper on a strategy for National Open Digital Ecosystem, NODE, has come. So we will discuss what is NODE. First of all, what is NODE? See, digital ecosystem, National Open Digital Ecosystem. So first of all, what is Open Digital Ecosystem? Why open? Okay. Open Digital Ecosystem, or this one, the coming one, the version is Government Tech, GovTech 3.0. What is the definition of it? Open and secure delivery platforms. Open means does not mean it will breach your privacy. Openness means transparency and a still safe and secure about encryption and everything, privacy of data and everything, secure delivery platforms anchored by transparent government mechanism. See, open means transparent government mechanism, and the purpose is to enable a technology collaboration among citizens, businesses and government, and that collaboration will lead to transformation of the societal outcomes. More outcomes will be coming, and the service delivery to the citizen business will be very high in quality and large in number, and because government is getting involved with citizen and business directly through this open and secure delivery platform, that is called GovTech 3.0 or Open Digital Ecosystem. So we were talking about GovTech 3.0 version. So we need to know the evolution of GovTech only. What was 1.0? What was 2.0? So let us see that. What is that? First of all, evolution of GovTech means use of technology in governance. Okay, governance technology, you can say that. So GovTech 1.0 was the era of computerization only. Manual processes were computerized. Your land records and everything, those were computerized. Putting income tax forms online, those were included in GovTech 1.0. What was GovTech 2.0? This was about building systems which digitize end-to-end process. Okay, you file something there that is online. You get the feedback, or you get the feedback form, or you get your service done online. That is GovTech 2.0, government's e-office file management system. You file a complaint, and the complaint reply, everything will be tracked, and you will get a reply. So that is file management system in electronic format, that is GovTech 2.0. So now what is GovTech 3.0? The focus is on open digital ecosystem for the transparency. The underlying philosophy is what? Government should focus on creating digital commons. And how the digital commons will be created? By opening your digital ecosystem to the people and to the businesses. The government will become a facilitator only. These things will be open, digital commons. That means commons means everything, which the things which belong to everyone. For example, sea is global commons, space is global commons. So this service will be also your digital commons for Indian citizens only, not globally. So government will become a facilitator only, and government, for that facilitating thing, government will create digital infrastructure on which innovators can collaboratively build solutions for the public good. See, very good thing, right? For example, deployment of contract tracing apps, Arogya Setu, contact tracing, sorry, Arogya Setu. You see, in Arogya Setu, every citizen has collaboration. You are switching on your Bluetooth, you are providing the assessment data and everything. So Arogya Setu is like GovTech 3.0, developed through the public-private partnership. Here only this commons was created. How? Government provided a platform, but over that innovators worked. That is public-private partnership, and that is how we are preventing the spread of virus. So this is GovTech 3.0 example, your Arogya Setu app. So what are the advantages of this 3.0 version? First of all, this is commons. So there will be integration of government services, one platform, and we are also calling it node, right? That is why we are calling it node. Take the example of e-transport project of Ministry of Road and Highways, MORTH. This is GovTech 3.0 example. Also, it will enhance social security. How? Several path-breaking open digital ecosystems are already in place for that in India. For example, you see Unified Payment Interface. In the financial space, it has played an instrumental role in increasing financial inclusion that enhance social security. In UPI also, many private people have worked, right? Many Google and all, those are based on UPI only. But there are some issues also, because you are having digital ecosystem, so you will have privacy issues. Potential violators of privacy are possible. There are federal issues also. The apps under GovTech 3.0 may end up gathering information which falls under the domain of the state subject. So if the central government is creating an app under GovTech 3.0 and taking data, so state may say that no, you are incurring a loss on us because these domains belong to us. Now you are coming to us, taking our rights, taking our executive power and legislative power. Security issues, same like privacy issues, cyber security challenges. We need to protect end-to-end security of data. That is the whole security issue actually. In the whole ecosystem, you need end-to-end protection of data, end-to-end encryption you see in WhatsApp and Telegram. That is what. So what are the steps we can do for removing these problems? First of all, address the privacy issue. You have Personal Data Protection Bill 2019 that can have some provisions for GovTech 3.0 data protection and privacy protection. Ensuring inclusivity. This should not be limited to only few people, okay? This commons should go to everyone. For that, we should have availability, accessibility. This should be affordable also, and it should have very good value, and the people should trust, so that only the inclusivity come, because many people still are not okay with digital ecosystem. They do not trust this. And ensuring transparency also. How come that transparency can come? First by design only. Second, by legislation, some laws, for example, Personal Data Protection Bill, governance framework, and public engagement also. You need to create some awareness among public also, and that will bring transparency. Citizen-centric design should be there, okay? So that there will be inclusive access to services by everyone, and there will be last mile delivery. Now, next topic is very conceptual. This is about elections and electoral reforms. Draft. This recommendation is in draft stage. Draft recommendations of Election Commission of India on electoral reforms. So first we need to know who gave this recommendation. The recommendation came by Election Commission of India. And what was the topic? Electoral reforms. So why Election Commission of India is giving the recommendation? Because Election Commission of India only knows that what kind of electoral reforms are needed. Government also knows that, but government will sleep over file. So Election Commission of India is giving the recommendation. Now accepting or rejecting that recommendation is in government's hand. So how this all started? There was created a 9 working groups. You know, after the Lok Sabha election last time, there were many issues raised. There were many protests raised against this Election Commission of India, and people said that there are some reforms needed because this does not look like a very independent body. For that, a 9 working group was created just after the Lok Sabha election, and that working group did not have only the Election Commission of India officials. It also had state chief electoral officers. Those people together, 9 working group has created this draft recommendation to Election Commission of India. That recommendation has come for everyone, for the political parties, for the people also, the voters also. For political parties, they are saying A major recommendation is that drafting a comprehensive bill that deals with the registration, recognition and funding of political parties. Everything is happening, registration, recognition and funding of political parties, but everything, registration, recognition and funding, is separated, and that is creating problems. So Election Commission of India is saying that please create a comprehensive bill which deals with registration, recognition and funding of political parties, include all those provisions which are present, improve some provisions and create a code kind of act. The number of members required for the registration of a party should be increased. Today we need only 100 people. They will go to the Election Commission of India and say that please register our party. Election Commission of India says that no, at least get some 1000 people. Okay, parties do not field any candidate in elections should be deregistered. For example, escaping the income tax return, some people create political parties, get their funds there and say that okay fine, we are political parties, so we do not need to pay the income tax, we just filing the income tax return, that is all. Now the Election Commission of India says that no, if a party is created and if they do not field any candidates, so what is the purpose? Somehow this looks shady. So please deregister them, include that provision in this comprehensive bill. Also it says that there should be legal provisions for regulating the funding. So these are the recommendations for the political parties. Some recommendations for the candidates fighting the election also. For that it says that draft a legal provisions to disqualify candidates for offences with a minimum of 5 years. So if a person is framed on charges, in that stage only, if the punishment includes 5 years of jail, then that person should be disqualified from fighting the election. Today the problem is that today there is provision, but provision says that only after the conviction, finally declared that yeah, this person was guilty, so now we are punishing him for 5 years, only that person cannot fight the election. But the Election Commission of India says that no, only when the framing of charges stage is done, if that punishment will be 5 years or more, we should disqualify that person from fighting the election. Do you think it is right? Framing of charges, maybe fake charges also, shady charges also. So there will be debate over this, but anyway this is the recommendation. Also for the candidate it says that the punishment for filing false affidavits, this has come in news about the degree, about the property and everything. So if a candidate files a false affidavit, today the punishment is 6 months. Now Election Commission of India says that make it 2 years, and the candidates found guilty of corruption, disloyalty and heinous crime should be permanently disqualified from fighting election from electoral purposes, electoral processes. Candidates contesting a different election should resign from the current seat. Currently what is the provision? Once you win the election and you are becoming a member with that election, a part of legislature, then you have to resign from the previous one. Now it says that when you are fighting the election only, you should resign from the current seat. That will also mean that you cannot fight two elections at the same time. So for the candidates, the provisions you know. Now for the political parties you know. What about the election process only, electoral process only? About the model code of conduct, we had so many voices raised against this, that Election Commission of India was not enforcing model code of conduct, and also model code of conduct is only reprimandatory in nature. They only scold, they cannot take any action, legal action. So for model code of conduct, a working group inside this 9-member group has suggested that we need some amendments, and we need to empower the commission to issue notice to a party for necessary correction in its manifesto. If in manifesto stage only there are some problems, Election Commission should be given the power that Election Commission will say to the party that see, in your manifesto you need to do some corrections. This is not the right thing you are saying that you will provide to the public, or this is not the right promise. So this notice making provision has been included, but this is again recommendation. Government will act or not, it is up to the government. And it is also suggested that for setting up of courts to adjudicate electoral offences and disallowing the use of government designations for the purpose of political publicity. What is that? If there is an electoral offence, there should be a special courts to adjudicate over it. And also if a person is using government resources or government people, government personnel or resources for political publicity, that should be disallowed. Disallowed today only, but now we need to take some extra action, strict action. Second recommendation is very interesting. And you know the electoral process takes a lot of time. So we need to constrict that duration. Just like UPSC, electoral process also takes lots of time. Under the community legal demographic profiling and election time zone system, factors like weather, examination schedules, and festivals all should be mapped in each state to facilitate scheduling of the polls. First of all, do the mapping. How is the weather? How is the examination schedule, a school examination, college examination schedule going in that state? What are the festivals of that state? And after that mapping, we will have some real data. Okay, fine. This festival is falling in this date, so we cannot conduct an election on that day. First, that data gathering is done, then only go for the scheduling of polls so that there is no conflict, there is no overlap. A standardization of electors' photo identity card numbers. Yeah, this should be a standardized. Setting of fast track courts for a speedy resolution expenditure related matters also. So the courts will be created for expenditure related matters also, and the courts should be created for, special courts should be also created for adjudication of electoral offences also. Our next topic is delimitation of the constituency. So government has constituted a delimitation commission after a long time, and that will be headed by former Supreme Court Judge Ranjana Prakash Desai. You should remember Ranjana Prakash Desai. You should also remember that this delimitation commission is headed by Supreme Court Judge Ranjana Prakash Desai. Both of these things. And what will that do? First of all, we created the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir recently. We need to go for the delimitation there. Okay, for the Lok Sabha and Assembly constituencies both. Also, this territory was created recently. So why we are not going for Ladakh? Why? Because Ladakh is not having an assembly, right? That's why. Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir is the one with the assembly. Currently the assembly is suspended, but once the election comes, this will become like Delhi and Puducherry. Legislative assembly is there, but still a union territory. After that, government is saying that after some years we will create the full-fledged state again. Anyway, this was easy, but why northeastern states of Assam, Arunachal Pradesh, Manipur and Nagaland? Because in the previous delimitation time, these states were having a huge number of violent incidences. Okay, there were some terrorist organizations, separatist organizations like Alpha were working very fiercely. So government said that door-to-door conduction and door-to-door counting of the population and the delimitation, that was not possible. So this was pending actually, Assam, Arunachal Pradesh, Manipur and Nagaland. But now government is saying that once the condition is quite peaceful, so we will go for the delimitation in this northeast states also. You should remember Assam, Arunachal Pradesh, Manipur and Nagaland only, not all the northeastern states. Delimitation definition very easy. Delimitation literally means the process of fixing limits or boundaries. So here it will say that previously, suppose this was one constituency. Now the election commission, this delimitation commission, not election commission. Now the delimitation commission says that this area has become very huge in population. For that population, we need to create two constituencies out of it. Also, it will say that we have seen that this left one, suppose it is A, suppose it is B. So left one has very huge population. Even if its geographical area is very small, it was having a huge population. So we will create one seat out of it. That is what is delimitation. Fixing limits or boundaries of territorial constituency in a state that has legislative bodies. That's why not your union territory of Ladakh, but union territory of Kashmir is present, because Kashmir has a legislative body. So what is this delimitation commission which does this exercise? Delimitation is undertaken by highly powerful commission. This commission is very highly powerful and it has the power of court. I will tell you what. They are formally known as delimitation commission or boundary commission. Okay, fine. These bodies are so powerful that its orders have the force of law. And they cannot be challenged before any court. So once a delimitation commission gives a decision, no judiciary can look into it whether it was right or wrong. Okay, delimitation commission have been constituted at least 4 times in India. 1952. Okay, and for every time we need to have an act. Okay, for every time we need to have a statutory provision, then only the delimitation commission is created. So first one was Delimitation Commission Act 1952, then 1963 under the Act 1962, then 1973 during the Indira Gandhi time, and the Act was 1972. Can you see? Act is created and then delimitation commission is made, then it does the exercise of delimitation. So 1972 Act and delimitation in 1973. During the time of Atal Bihari Vajpayee, delimitation Act came in 2002, and in the same year delimitation commission was constituted. The commission's orders are enforced as per the date specified by the President of India. They will give some recommendation, they will give the delimitation, and a particular date is decided by the President of India. From that date, that commission's orders will be enforced. Copies of these orders are laid before the Lok Sabha for everyone to see. And if it is about the Legislative Assembly, so in Legislative Assembly also that constituency copies, delimitation, commission decision and order are laid. No modifications are permitted. No modification, nothing, no judiciary, no one can say anything. They just can know that okay fine, delimitation happened. Next topic, very important. In the state of Haryana, there is a system created, quota within quota for scheduled caste. What is that? This provision in that month was in drafting bill stage. Okay, Haryana cabinet decided that they approved a draft bill. That bill was Haryana Scheduled Caste Reservation in Admission in Educational Institutions Bill 2020. The bill has system of quota within quota. They are saying that some people in a scheduled caste are also more weak, some are more strong. So we need to create quota within quota. So we will see what are the provisions and highlights of the bill. The bill provides a reservation of 50% seats to the deprived scheduled caste out of the total 20% seats reserved for Supreme Court for SC scheduled caste in graduation and post-graduation courses. You understand what is happening? 100 seats were there in the graduation and post-graduation courses. So out of that 20% was, 20 was the quota for Dalits or scheduled caste. In that 20 they are saying that 50% or 10 seats will be provided to the very deprived scheduled caste. This will cover all educational institutions maintained by the government or receiving aid out of the state fund, not the private ones. Okay, it also includes government and government aided technical and professional institution, everything. So what is deprived scheduled caste? It includes all 36 castes which are part of Block A, including Valmiki, Bazigar, Sansai, Deha, Dhanak and Sapera. Okay, we do not need to go in the detail, but this is the provision. This is the Haryana government's quota within quota system. Now the question will arise that can you differentiate between the Dalit caste? So obviously this case will go in Supreme Court and High Court and the decision is awaited. We can see that what is happening. Next topic is Section 188 IPC. This has come in news during the Epidemic Disease Act. This has come in news. Why? I will tell you. During the COVID-19, the state government have issued under this section 188 of the Indian Penal Code some orders. If anyone flouts that orders, that person will be punished. And where it is mentioned, your country has Epidemics Disease Act 1897 coming from the British time. Why this 1897? This was the plague time. This was the Pune plague time, Maharashtra plague time. In fact, all India, almost 10 million people died. But this was huge in Maharashtra, and there only, if you read the modern history, some people executed the British officers for that. Rand was the officer. Epidemic Disease Act 1897 by the British India in that time is still okay, still running, lays down punishments as per section 188 of the Indian Penal Code 1860. So, Disease Act is Epidemic Disease Act 1897. That act mentions that we will punish any person who flouts the orders issued by various state government to contain the spread of COVID-19. That time it was plague. COVID-19 plague, or you call it black death, black fever, something like that. So anybody flouts this order by the state government, the government will punish by Indian Penal Code 188. Act does not mention punishment, right? Punishment will come by section 188 of the Indian Penal Code. 188, then what? 188 relates to disobedience to order duly promulgated by the public servant. Okay, 188 says that if you disobey the order issued by public servant or the state government, you will be punished. And the act mentions that if you disobey any order issued during the pandemic or epidemic, whether it is COVID-19 or plague, you will be punished by this section 188. That will be equal to violating the order of public servant. So what are the imprisonments mentioned? For example, a state issues that okay, you do have to wear mask if you go outside. If you are not wearing the mask, you will be punished by section 188 of the IPC under this act. It says that violators can be punished with simple imprisonment for a term which may extend to 1 month, or with a fine which may extend to 200 rupees only. You see, 200 rupees only. 1 month prison is okay, but 200 rupees only. And if such disobedience causes or tends to cause danger to human life, for example, someone having the infection, going in the public, or standing among 5 people and sneezing there, if that case happens, of health, safety, or causes to tend a riot or affray. Riot is also included. Okay, that person shall be punished with imprisonment of either description for a term which may extend up to 6 months. Only 6 months, still very less, or with fine which may extend to 1000 rupees. What is happening actually during the British time, the fine was very low because we were a poor country and everything, money was also less. So in that time fine was very low. But with time the fine has increased, but this has not increased proportionately. So that is why this section 188 of the IPC is in news, and we need some improvement. We need enhancement of this fine and the punishment period also. So that is all for today. Tomorrow in the 22nd class we will be doing April month polity current affairs. Thank you.